and Gordon Cook. And what he's doing with the clay is taking different colors of clay and then rolling it out together and squishing it in, at least in the case of this one on your right. And the end result, again, is paper thin. I mean, you can practically blow this one over with a sneeze. It's so delicate. Jeffrey Swindell. You know, completely inventive here. It looks like a flower bulb. It looks a little bit like, you know, that giant Venus flytrap from the musical, you know, Eat Me, Seymour, or Seymour, Eat Me, however it goes. But, you know, precious, precious little decoration, and the whole thing's only this big. And you think about all that time and all the attention, the various firings, the multiple firings that go in to get the crackle glaze, then to get the iridescence, and then to get the different colors. Some of these pieces, I recently spoke with an artist, and sometimes up to 25 firings to get the final effect and to get all those different things. So there's such an amount of patience involved. Yeah. One piece. One piece. And again, it's you know, it's a dedication. You know, you think about someone painting a giant heroic painting, and that same thing happens with ceramics. It's not simply a matter of, you know, sloshing some glaze on, putting it in the fire. If it doesn't explode in the kiln, hey, it comes out. I consider it a masterwork. It's really about building up a surface for a lot of these makers. Ewan Henderson's another British maker. And does anybody remember what is so bizarre about this particular piece? This one's against all the rules. Absolutely every single rule. In fact, I still can't wrap my head around how it would have been done. And unfortunately, he's not here for me to meet because he passed away in 2002 so that I could ask him how he did this. But there is stoneware, earthenware, and porcelain, all three clay bodies in the same vessel. And it didn't explode. So you get a sense of, you know, porcelain. You have to wonder, you know, at what temperature, for how long did he fire it to get it to vitrify and be solid. And, you know, it's just an amazing sculptural form. And again, you know, he had this real interest in nature and in the effects of rocks and moss on rocks. And, you know, how better to capture it than this? Jennifer Lee's a more contemporary British maker, but again, working with all these different clays, rolling them out together, forming it into this very lightweight, very fragile form. And just to throw in one of the Swedish makers from Sydney's collection, this is a Lev Seisby, and it's very much a Danish aesthetic to go for these paper-thin forms, just very nuanced and very subtle coloring. Like you have just this little bit of kind of an orange gold and a little bit of a pink, a little bit of a tinge, and then these mineral oxides coming out of the clay body itself. Of course, where the story gets very dramatic for us is with Peter Volkos. And Peter Volkos, he represents listening to the teachings of Bernard Leach and learning about Japanese traditions, being influenced by, of course, what's happening in contemporary art, abstract expressionism, and deciding to throw it all together in clay, which is to break all the rules. And of course, it was a controversial figure. For some ceramic makers today, he can still be controversial. I mean, he caused many ceramicists, James Lavera admittedly, to have sort of a crisis of, you know, why do they do what they do? And that's kind of an ongoing thread for, you know, ceramic artists at a certain point in time. Some of his students, such as John Mason, this is at the Oakland Museum. This is a figure we still need for our collection to tell a complete story. But out of those, we have a Paul Soldner piece, hoping for an even better representative Paul Soldner piece at some point. But we have Jerry Rothman. And you can see him, you know, combining, you know, sort of these Asian traditions of these, you know, these brass urns and but doing it with sort of a postmodern flair, and definitely with that beautiful purple glaze, and be very funky. Another important maker in our collection is Ken Ferguson, and oops, I keep missing on this. So these baskets became what he was most famous for. And what I love about our basket is that he would create these hairs, and they would have ears, and they would become very much more distinct so that they looked very much like rabbits. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, because I love it when I make a particular ceramics dealer in San Francisco grind his teeth when I call this a proto-bunny basket. It was, moving towards the bunnies. He was working up at the Archie Bray Foundation, and there was a lot of wildlife there, and that was what was inspiring him. And he hasn't fully committed to the concept at that time, but you can see it starting to happen, little faces and ears, these wonderful little feet. Jana David Schoener, again, another big figure, also associated with Archie Bray. Unfortunately, he worked with manganese glazes a lot, and that affected his health. He passed away in 2002. He called these his pillow pots, which is pretty apt, isn't it? Here's another one with an opening in it. This is one of the ones with the manganese glaze. But you can see why he was so attracted to that surface, which can be rough and shiny at the same time. And this is a very iconic form. Don Wright's another major figure that we have in the collection. And Don Wright's has been a pretty consistent maker, but his tea stacks are so lovely because don't they really combine Peter Volkos with other postmodern traditions? Think about Betty Woodman. And for those of you who know her, she has this very painterly vessels that she would call them kimono pots, for example, and they would have wings that fly off of them that were attached on. Just a very, very colorful sort of thing. He didn't go for that colorful paint, but you get that sense of, well, what can I attach here? And where can I put a finger indentation here? And let's just kind of poke this out. And then, oh, by the way, let's put a seam, which almost could be like a detail of buttons or a skirt hem, or it could be industrial in its appearance. And it's all put together, and at the end, it almost seems figural, doesn't it? You can almost see a woman going. So, a lot of great play there. And at the same time, still really relishing that mark of the maker in the clay, which is what Peter Volkos really liked. He really liked showing the process of how you make. I'm here is sort of what he's saying. Oop, backwards. So what came as a surprise to me, it was only going through old Ceramics Monthly magazines, was that Dick Hay, this artist, started off as a funk artist. And that topic we're going to cover more in the second chapter of this. And there'll be more bad puns and more jokes in that lecture. Because the material, it lends itself to it. And, of course, have to explain it if it's not completely obvious. But it's interesting to see as we move into the 80s, a whole shift in sensibility happening in American clay, in American studio ceramics. And, here it looks like a woman wearing a dress, doesn't it? And a bodice, and here's someone also with very fancy sleeves, very geometric. And a lot of these 80s designs are coming back around again, not only in fashion, but in clay. The color blocking that you can now get at Target is just absolutely frightening to me. And little bits of metal details are now back in fashion on heels. So, dig into the closets. This is Marisa Kula, who was born in 1944. This is also, kind of at the moment that Frank Gehry is starting to make his career with his furniture. And Michael Graves as well. Michael Duvall. I mean, when you talk about architectonic, it looks like architecture, doesn't it? These little quotes in great color. John Gill in the collection. And his approach is, a little bit more interesting because it's architectural in some regard, it's organic in some regards, and then it almost It almost looks sort of like a bizarre animal heart, doesn't it? We've got these aortas or ventricles coming out and all this color, but it's very well constructed and constructed in so many different pieces. You can see them, either extruding or rolling the tube separately and then making the joins. And so there's a new complexity starting to happen with all these new joins coming together. And the commercial glazes, which you talk about with funk ceramics in particular, using a lot of high intense color. And you see that, of course, back here with all of these. That's something that really came out of, what happened in Davis. I just thought, Barbara Diduck, she is not as well known, born in 1951, but, I just love this little curlicue detail here. And again, sort of this swank personality to everything. Very playful. Anne Herondale. And this is also a trend that starts to emerge about having ceramic pieces that relate to one another. Instead of just having a single form, or, whereas in the past you might look at having an entire table set that goes together so that the creamer mat, has speaking to the sugar and speaking to the salts, et cetera. Here you're doing it in a much more limited way. And it's just the two pieces. And mounted so that they mirror each other, and then they fit together rather seamlessly. And same here with Michael Cheryl's pieces. Very colorful. But, each one was designed in order to have a conversation off the other one. And the fun thing about this, of course, is you can reverse it, and you can look at the colors on the other side. But, you sort of have like a little garden growing there. Little leaves, little buds. But this whole concept, and the concept just starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger in contemporary ceramics up to this moment. And more political. These are Richard Notkin pieces that were part of the Hugh Arnold collection. And I have to say that David Gahuli and Richard Notkin were one of those fundamental moments for me when I was maybe about 11 or 12. Little known is that the Topeka Public Library has an amazing ceramics collection and a Michael Graves design library building with a beautiful art gallery and beautiful space, very large space for the art gallery even before the new building. And, go in, get your books on ballet, get your books on, whatever for fun, and step into the gallery and look. And there was one of those Notkin die with the nuclear explosion, top. And I just thought, wow. You can make something that you can open up, and it can be talking about something that is scaring me senseless at the moment, because of all the talk that was going on about, escalation and, all that kind of good stuff. And then, to see these wonderful skulls. For me, it was one of those moments about the power of communication in ceramics, and it was really an eye-opening experience. It's like you can pretty much make anything you want to make. You don't have to just follow rules. You don't have to do what is tradition. And I don't know. For me, it was a big moment. Now, Paul Dresang is someone I feel should be highly regarded, and so I'm going to speak to you about him. And part of that is based on the fact that when I was in graduate school and I was still intending on or undergraduate, and I was still intending on being a fine artist, I was just hanging out, working on my work, and he was there working with the graduate students. And since I lingered so long, eventually I just started overhearing, and then I just stopped and started watching. And it would take tweezers to roll each of those tiny little balls of clay, porcelain. And then he would roll them, sometimes with his finger, and he would take so much time doing it. It wasn't like, let's just get this task done and over with. And it was like, wow. I'm an impatient person, so, just seeing someone really care to take that long to roll a little bead, and then to watch him pick up with tweezers and drop it so precisely on. And he never redid one. It was always precisely where he wanted it. And, same with all of these tiny little holes, some of them punched with, little pointy metal instruments, sometimes a toothpick. And he would go through and re-articulate and re-smooth all of these joints. So like this little, roll of clay that helped demarcate and draw attention to the join. He would then go in and just draw a little line just to make it particularly crisp. That same sort of attention that gets paid to, really well-tailored clothes. Paul Dresang, Dresang. And here's the best part of all this, at least that particular day, was the lid removes, there's a spout, obviously a T-handle, but guess what? There is no hole between the chamber and the spout. What ensued afterwards was the instructor who had invited him to come and demonstrate to the graduate students, going off on his own particular passionate conviction, which amounted in some regards, at least to me with big open eyes, going, wow, he's speaking to this guy this way, being berated for, why would you make this thing and not have it function? What is the purpose of quoting a functional object and not having it actually work? And that was my first introduction to all the philosophy that can go into making. And after a certain point of time, what occurred to me was well, if you're making this and you're being very intentional about making it, it's really what the artist wants it to be. It's not what you may want it to be when you buy it because it looks like a teapot. It's about what the artist wants it to be. And then the last thought I had, which may not have been a comment that was particularly appreciated when I did meekly raise my hand. I used to be shy, believe it or not. Was that, well, if somebody's going to buy this and it's so beautiful, why would you risk making it dirty? Why would you risk exactly chipping it? I mean, I suppose at a certain point that there might be pleasure in having something so fine and pouring it. But I thought, all the pleasure in this really is looking at all those details and approaching it from all these different angles. And something like this, the longer you look, the more pops out. And it's just soda fired, which gives it this nice sort of, salmon kind of color and some differences. And it's the same with this in this piece, which has this sort of quotation of a women's corset, the stripes kind of Victorian, these little dentillations for lace, these lovely little curlicues. And of course, taking on a loving cup form, one of the things, again, favorite story I've told before, is that Sidney, the collector, did not recognize the anatomical references in the piece. Here, and here, and here, making this very cleverly and very truly a loving cup. Here's another view where it's a little bit more pronounced. So witty, huh? So dry, but very witty. This little detail, just in case you missed it. And again, another detail in case you missed the references. So beautifully done. I mean, even here, you can use your imagination here, what he might have been inspired by. So lovely. Just some of the additional playfulness that starts to happen in, the 1980s. And some of this is propelled by there being a massive change from, ceramics being something such as Warren Mackenzie, where he sells his ceramics for many, many, many decades just out of his studio. He would have an open studio. You could just come in. It was even on an honor system, pick up what you wanted, put the money in the basket, leave. And then people started abusing the honor system, and now he works with some galleries. But he tries to keep his prices very low. To there being attention in galleries to some of this work. And there's still kind of a divide, and it's still sort of contentious within this one medium of art, which is there are a lot of people who still want to do the lifestyle, and they do a lot of wood fire, and it's about the community that happens when you bring a bunch of people together and you get all that wood ready, and you have to stoke this giant kiln, and you have to stay there monitoring it for like 5 days and 5 nights, and then cool it before you open it to get your end result. And having still somewhat of a rural lifestyle, because backyards are pretty small, and no neighbor's going to allow you to fire a wood firing kiln and have people up in the middle of the night, drinking beers and stuff, passing time. To, work that is, a little bit more intimate and, so detailed that it does appeal to a particular audience. And it starts to be shown in places that show paintings by very famous people. This is Tim Mather. And again, you see like a little detail, like a little cityscape, a little house here, some tools that are kind of added in, just little surprises that are unexpected. Some of these things, and especially the color, looks like earlier bronzes. And so there's these quotations, but then they get to be even more fun and outrageous. Like over here, you have this sort of skeletal machine assemblage sculpture creature, and kind of some, worms and other little pieces. And, again here, like something that's kind of topsy-turvy, something that looks like a vehicle, or looks like a Japanese temple that's had something fall on it or fall apart from it. Lots of fun little quotes, things to explore. But again, speaking about the lifestyle with the wood burning, here's Randy Johnston. He shows with Trax Gallery down in Berkeley. And he was born in 1949, so you're starting to see, some of the change in generation as well. Tim Mather was born in 1943. Rob Barnard, who we just did a show on, he definitely believes in the integrity of the lifestyle. He's in Virginia, he's rural, he teaches at a community college, but he has formed his entire life perspective around this idea of what it is to be a potter and what the value of that lifestyle is. And that, sometimes makes him a hard guy to talk to, because you're definitely not going to have a conversation with him about Katy Perry or Miley Cyrus, and the finger and everything. He cannot relate to you. And he also can have a very scornful kind of expression. That said, he's a very, very nice guy, but it's just he's really set up his life with this, this idea of how to live a life of integrity. And, creating something is part of that. Not just being a consumer, but being a creator. This is Yoshiro Ikeda. Taught at Kansas State University in Manhattan for many years and was very influential. And you do get a sense of a melding of aesthetics. He came from Japan, was in Ventura for many years for school before he went to teach in the Midwest. And you have this beautiful repetition of design that is not uncommon to some of the things that we saw in that Soaring Voices exhibition that we had in 2009. Another maker, Elaine Coleman, American, but mining some of those earlier wonderful Asian porcelain traditions. This beautiful, beautiful carving into the teapot. Super exquisite, lovely celadon glaze, really on the blue-gray side, which, makes you feel like you're seeing something in water almost. And her husband, Tom Coleman, very well known, and he does a variety of very colorful, very large vessels and very small vessels. And his attention's really to shape. Some of his colors are, this blood red, oxen red that's, Chinese in origin. But, it's more of a sense of having a whole, almost body again. Very svelte, comes apart in two pieces. Seamed, and then it just has this tiny little lid and then this little quote of Asian lugs at the top. John Glick is another maker who, whereas he is not as austere in his production, he's much more colorful, but you see a melding of painting, and somebody who had a real interest in painting and bringing it to clay, and doing it all with glazes in this instance, swirling them around with these big, big plates, but he's in the process now of closing his studio, which is outside of Bloomfield Hills in Michigan, and his plans are to come to California. But he has years upon years, decades of work. He's sold entire sets, to people, to consume, have entire dining sets, and he's fine with that production. But he's also done major, pieces such as these giant chargers, which are for museum display. And, he's somebody who's kind of straddled all these different veins in clay. Bennett Bean shows some of those more painterly trends again, but with, sticking within this idiom of clay. And he has these nice little inserts of color that are painted on top using acrylic paint. But this here is, a little bit of smoke, from having, it's almost like a raku fire. You have something on fire and then you damp down, you quash the oxygen to produce that beautiful dark smokiness at the top. That was a museum acquisition purchase. And then you compare it to Andrea Gill. And just all these wonderful textile quotes. It almost looks like someone wearing a kimono. And it changes angle by angle. So it's, like a fully dimensional sculpture. So I'm not, in some regard, unlike a David Smith Cubi, you're supposed to approach it from different angles. I think this is just an absolutely stunning piece that we have in the collection. And Suzanne Stevenson, again, melding the force of really thick painting and abstract expressionism, and then putting in this great color to go with it. If you didn't know this was a pot, you could probably show this as an image next to a mid-century or even some of the contemporary oil painting happening today, and see how thick those surfaces get built up, and you wouldn't know it was a plate. And more recent production by Chuck Idlet. And this is something that Sidney was, at one point he wanted his collection to go to the MFA Boston, so he was working with the curator there. And then, quite frankly, he collected too many things, and it was just more than the MFA Boston was willing to take on. And he wasn't willing to have curators cherry pick the collection. And at the time, there were a lot of names that we didn't have here. And his collection allowed us to single-stop shop in a way. And the works are good. I mean, that Andrea Gill is fantastic. That Suzanne Stevenson plate is one of the best I've seen. And, so that curator was really interested in bringing, drawing with China crayon into the form. And then also these mold cast figures. Got these kind of like teardrop forms. Maybe a little bit of political content. But this idea of communicating message. Toni Marsh is a more conceptual maker. He's down in Long Beach. He's been teaching a long time. And it's, almost Zen. This, balanced tray. And then these forms that almost seem like a sponge. Something a little more nebulous. And he's done a lot of work where he's, perforated little holes and everything. Of course, the Curtis Bensley. Just phenomenal technique. Porcelain so thin you can shine light through it. Wonderful colors. Counterpart in the Angela Verdun, who's a British maker. That one, of course, is only yay tall. Of course, you can see that up in the galleries. And I just love the way this photograph caught how the light would shine on the bone china. You can just basically see through the china. And I thought these were such a great little couple to having a tango. Again, the creator, looking at the pieces, looking at how they can go together, and then being so much a painter. And Jackie Stevens, she's a Native American maker, and, an interesting thing is that in some regards she should probably be in with the collection that we're building of Southwest ceramics and traditions. It's all hand coiled. It's thin as can be, but it's huge. And smoothed by stones, so the surface is, almost waxy soft. And really like a big egg. So one of the things I wanted to end up with, and I'm sure I'm taking too much time here, I need to wrap it up, but I just recently saw some works of Kathy Butterly. Kathy Butterly studied at UC Davis, and she's one of the ones that we're missing in the collection, especially a really signature example. But here's the thing I learned, is that her pieces sell from $18,000 to $28,000. And this is for something that is yay high. But why they sell for that is not only because she's built a career over a long period of time, built up a dedicated collector base, and had terrific New York representation, but it's what looking closely reveals. She will fire these upwards of 25 times. Even this little thing, this little line, super thin, and she's collapsed the pieces. In a way, it shows like some almost a nod to early Stephen Kaltenbach works that were created over there at UC Davis in clay. But there's an actual line that she's then infilled with the orange. The orange isn't sitting on top of a thin lip. It's actually a line in there. And then all the beads and the gold luster applied and the tiny little lines and even the feet, which are somewhat Asian inspired, have a little hole in them. And there's an orange underground and then the green on top. And this, which looks like, a Paul Jenkins painting. And what I noticed from all the works on display is that she really was looking at mid-century painting, revisiting that. And each piece seemed to reference whether it was a Barnett or a Kenneth Noland or a Morris Louis. A lot of color, but a lot of mid-century painting being brought into the conversation. This one was really phenomenal because at first you just see this line of turquoise and you have to really go in and focus to realize it's a second layer of beads dumped on there. And then each one of these clay, this is like an envelope with 3 different, like pastry sheets of clay on top. And everything's been very purposefully slumped. As is the case here with all of these. And you would think, okay, there's multiple pieces that have been joined together. No, this is a single vessel that she began slumping and playing with to get these enormous curves. And yet it didn't collapse entirely. And if you played with clay, that's a pretty remarkable phenomenon. And then this sort of, I forget what the detailing is. My mother used to sew it on my jumpsuits when I was in a rickrack. Thank you. Yeah, these layers of rickrack. It's truly remarkable, and even there's even more color in there than what this is showing. And they had some older pieces back in this gallery, and you could see, what became clear is that she'll go through a period where she's really reflecting on a certain era of ceramics production, whether it's George Orr or if it's Art Nouveau ceramics by the many makers of Art Nouveau ceramics. And she starts weaving these influences into her works. And, which seems to be happening here with, sort of mid-century influences. And I was dazzled, no matter which angle, whether you're squatting down low or looking in, how much there was to see. And Ken Nagel, she had a piece in there that actually, Ron Nagel, that quoted one of his pieces, and of course he has taught at Mills College for decades and is associated with UC Davis, and he's someone else that we don't quite yet have for the collection, but you can see just the refinement to what he does. And so no matter how many names I've thrown at you today, there's still more names we need. And that sometimes is like one of the most exciting things about art is just all this amazing potential, creative potential, all this accomplishment, all of this spirit of humanity that's in art and in clay in particular, but yet there's always more. And this is the Nagel that they have at the Oakland Museum in a vitrine. And I just put this out here because if you ever meet anyone who has a really nice Nagel, one that's better than this one, you're some of our best resources. Mention the Crocker. So that is an introduction to ceramics.